Good afternoon and welcome to FedEx Express presents the Economic Times ESG Leadership Dialogue on ESG Paving the Way for the Future of Business in India, brought to you by ET Edge. I'm your host, Isha Bhalla. As businesses navigate the changes brought in by globalization, technology, society, and consumer behavior, companies need to embrace ESG as a strategic business imperative to drive long-term value. A strong ESG proposition has the potential to revamp how successful companies plan, implement, and operate. At the panel discussion today, leaders from diverse sectors will discuss the rising importance of ESG in India and how it creates value for companies and their stakeholders. FedEx is working their way towards delivering a more sustainable future, including a goal of carbon neutral operations by 2040. Priority Earth is their initiative to reach that goal. So let us begin with a very interesting fireside chat with Mr. Raj Subramaniam, President and COO FedEx Corporation, and in conversation with Mr. Vinod Mahanta, Senior Editor, The Economic Times, as they really speak about how ESG has become a universal call to action for businesses globally and the FedEx approach that is embedded into their systems and culture.
Raj, thank you so much for doing this with Economic Times.
Thank you very much for inviting me for this session. This is a very important subject, and on behalf of FedEx, I'm just delighted to be here today.
Great. So FedEx globally has been at the forefront of adopting ESG practices. When you do such large transformational programs, one of the things is you have to align your corporate strategy with such programs. How are you aligning the FedEx global strategy along with the ESG strategy?
Well, the first thing I would say is that the words ES and G have started to take prominence in the last, let's call it 3, 4, 5 years. But it's something that's been in the FedEx DNA for many, many years. So it's not something that's new to us. We always believe in doing things versus talking about doing things. And so this is what we have done, and it's parcel of our entire FedEx culture. So, we thought very, very carefully about the goals, and we, were the first in our industry to launch very aggressive goals of being carbon neutral by 2040. And so, this is again, like I said, something that, we have thought about deeply, something that we care about deeply as a company, and something that we act on. But let me also just say that there's E, S, and G, and let me just cover the part of S for a second, because especially in the last 2 years, when the world has gone through a tremendous situation here dealing with this pandemic, I'm just very, very proud of the work that FedEx has done. I think this is one of the most important work that we have done in the history, 50-year history, almost 50-year history of FedEx. And I will also make a point here that FedEx played a significant role in helping India, especially almost a year ago during last April. The fact of the matter is FedEx has got a network in place, and network people take for granted. Network is something that exists or doesn't exist. If it exists, then you can take something from any point in the world and get it to any other point in the world in a matter of a couple of days. And it's not something you can spring it up out of thin air. But we have the network. We have 40 flights a week into India every week. And so then we were able to move thousands and thousands and thousands of oxygen concentrators into India and provide other help during that time. And we have moved hundreds of millions of vaccines around the world, moved billions of PPEs and so on and so forth. So again, the whole ESG component for FedEx is really the heart of what we are about.
Thank you so much for helping India when we needed all the help. So one of the important things in such large transformation is basically the backbone on which such the transformation takes place. Technology is going to play a very important role in this transformation. How do you see technology helping FedEx in the journey?
You're 100% right, because technology is very, very critical. We see ourselves at the intersection of physical and digital spaces, and really we are in the midst of a huge transformation in this regard. Now, technology is not new to FedEx, and again, we talk about DNA. Our founder, Fred Smith, talked about the information about a package being as important as the package itself. And you might say, oh, that sounds interesting, but he said that in 1978. And that laid the foundation for launching, tracking, tracing, and so on and so forth. All the things that have come after that have laid the foundation to where we are today. So what we're taking the next step here is actually building common data platforms with our customers. We have launched a new unit called FedEx DataWorks, and we're working with some of the largest companies in the world to create these common data platforms. So you may ask, what's that to do with ESG? The reason is we totally believe that we want to make supply chains smarter. And that's done by collaboration across industries. And technology plays a real critical role in optimizing our supply chain, optimizing our customer supply chain, providing enhanced visibility to the end customer, and so on. And through this process, we will reduce carbon emissions not only for us but throughout the entire supply chain. So that's one. The second part of it is just the fact that we are committed to electrification. And one of the, obviously we have a lot of assets. We have, almost 200,000 motorized vehicles. We have 700 airplanes. We have more than thousands of facilities around the world. And so, especially on those, motorized vehicles, electrification is our path to success here. And so we are well committed to that. In fact, in India, we are, launching, in Bangalore and now soon to be in Delhi, electrification trials as well. So this is something that's happening all around the world for FedEx.
One of the things is basically when you have an operation as large as FedEx has, is how do you take the idea from boardroom to the front line? I was going through the ESG report, fantastic work. How have you made sure that the mission cascades down to the front line?
That's an excellent point. And one of the things that we pride ourselves is the ability to communicate and connect our global team members. We have almost 600,000 FedEx team members around the world. And as important as all the assets I told you earlier, the most important assets are our 600,000 frontline folks. In fact, they are the key reason that we have been successful in the last couple of years. And that's just the true FedEx heroes. So for us, communication to the front line is very important. And the second part of that is very important is the fact that we are held together with a common culture. We have a common language that connects us. Doesn't matter which operating company you are in or which part of the world we are in. I've had the great fortune of living and working in different parts of the world. I used to travel the world constantly before the pandemic. But one of the things that people ask me all the time is, how are things different, and how challenging is it to deal with differences in different parts of the world? And the reality, however, in the FedEx world is that even if the language of the country is different, the language of FedEx is the same. And so we are all connected by our unique philosophy, which we call people, service, profit. We take care of our people, they deliver outstanding service, delivers profit for the company, which we reinvest back in our people. And, so we have this common ethos, and that communication mechanisms around the world are well oiled so that we are able to communicate our mission. And specifically in the ESG area, the resonance of that message has been spectacular. And India is actually a very good example of that.
FedEx is a Fortune 500 company at the cutting edge of ESG. And do you think India Inc. should also get onto this ESG bandwagon? It is an imperative of our times.
Firstly, I consider India is to be an extremely important strategic market and priority for FedEx. So that being aside, in the global stage, India is a fast rising economy, fast rising in the weight of which is contributing to the global affairs. And I have been involved in dealing with U.S.-India affairs for a very, very long time. And I just see it as a moment here that the relative importance of India is continuing to rise. So the activities in India, therefore, are extremely, extremely important to this effort. So when I think about this, what the Indian government decides and India decides to do is not only important for India, but for the entire globe. So that's why I was, when in the recent COP26 meeting, in the commitments that were made, was very interesting, to get India to get its non-fossil fuel capacity to 500 gigawatts by 2030, or India to meet 50% of its energy requirements from renewable sources by 2030, or reducing the projected carbon emission by 1 billion tons by 2030, or carbon intensity of the economy reduction by 45% by 2030, and achieve net zero by 2070. Those are very, very, very important goals, and I feel that that the Indian government understands the role that it has to play.
Some of the sectors actually need more work from on the ESG front, and transportation is one. Yes. Do you think that going forward, ESG will be a value driver in transportation business as well?
100%. There's no question about it. And so one of the things that I wanted to tell you is that as much as, some of the answers are present, a lot of the answers are not yet readily available. And so that's why, we donated $100 million to create the Yale Center for Natural Carbon Capture. And this is to do fundamental research to find solutions to problems that haven't been solved yet. So, it's not that we know all the answers. And so, we think carbon capture is one particular area. There is great opportunity. We think we can reduce, as an initial goal, 1 billion tons of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere in a year. And then go from there, but it requires some fundamental research, and that's why we provided the funding for that. There are now other partners who have joined that effort. Again, doesn't matter, they're across the transportation industry right now, but it could be anybody. But again, as we build solutions through electrification and other things, we also know that there are other more difficult challenges and problems to be solved through fundamental research, and that's what we are supporting.
Sure. Last question, and you spoke about the Indian cricket team, so it's going to be a good league. ESG is a cost to business. How do you make the finance and the sustainability team sit together at the same table?
Oh, I think I used to play Googly's pretty good, so I'm all right. Listen, I think what is fundamentally changing is that at the consumer level, there is an increasing level of understanding of what ESG means. And I wouldn't say this was the case even 5 years ago, and I would even say that it is the case uniformly geographically at this point. But if you roll forward from here, I suspect that the awareness of people's making choices are going to be, the choices that people make are going to get more and more particular. And so I think soon we'll be in a stage where people will be able to make green choices. And then with the dollar, so to speak, something maybe initially more expensive, and then a scale comes in, the price may come down. I feel like the people are going to get more responsible, make those green choices. Perhaps it may cost a little bit more than initially, but then as scaling effects take place, then it becomes the norm versus not. So I think that's the transition that's ahead of us, and it's a very good point. And but honestly, the financial community, the investor community, the businesses at large, the consumers at large are in a very different place today than they were 5 years ago.
Thank you so much. Thanks for spending time out of a busy schedule for Economic Times. Really appreciate this.
Thank you very much, Vinod. And it was wonderful meeting you. And I look forward to seeing you in person on my next visit.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you so very much, gentlemen. This was a very insightful conversation. Moving ahead, it's now time for us to hear how ESG will drive the next wave of business transformation in India. And moderating this power-packed panel discussion is Ms. Kami Vishwanathan, Vice President of Marketing for FedEx in the Asia, Middle East, and Africa region. And we now welcome our esteemed panelists. I present to you Ms. Anjali Bansal, founder of Avana Capital, Mr. O.P. Agarwal, Chief Executive Officer, WRI India. A very warm welcome to Dr. Vibha Dhawan, Director General, TERI, Mr. Sandeep Barasia, Chief Business Officer, Delivery. May I also present to you Mr. Prabodhya Acharya, Chief Sustainability Officer, GSW. Let us look forward to this very, very interesting panel discussion.
Thanks, Isha. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this discussion today on ESG, paving the way for the future of business in India at the ET and FedEx ESG Leadership Dialogue. As you've just heard from our President and COO, Raj, ESG is deeply aligned with our mission and values at FedEx and embedded into our systems and culture. And I'm delighted to be moderating this panel with industry and thought leaders today. Today's discussion will focus on how companies can build value with ESG in a way that is relevant and meaningful to India's realities and opportunities, and how the ecosystem can work together to achieve these outcomes. I'd like to welcome our panelists. It would be great to get started with brief introductions. If I may request you, Mr. Acharya, to start and introduce yourself, and we will then go across the room.
Thank you, Kami, and good afternoon, everybody. My name is Prabodhya Acharya. I'm responsible for driving sustainability strategy across JSW Group businesses. Thank you.
Dr. Dhawan?
Yeah, Vibha Dhawan. I'm from TERI, basically a plant biotechnologist. But if you want TERI to be described in 2 words, I'll say we work towards sustainable development and issues related to climate change. Thank you.
Thank you. Sandeep?
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sandeep Barasia. I'm the Chief Business Officer and a whole-time Director at Delivery. I do 2 things at the company. I look after all the revenue side of the business, revenue for the business, and I also work on a whole bunch of board issues, including our strategy and fundraising and things like that. Glad to be here.
Thanks, Sandeep. Anjali?
Good afternoon, everyone. Delighted to be here. I'm Anjali Bansal. I'm the founder of Avana Capital. We are an early stage fund that invests behind technology and innovation-led businesses that are actually working specifically on climate action and sustainability. We are a full returns fund and strongly believe that what digitization was for the last 20 years, sustainability will be for the next 20. I also serve as an independent director on several boards, including Tata Power, Piramal Enterprises, Kotak, and a few others. And I'm currently president of Bombay Chamber of Commerce and Industry. I serve on CII's National Committee on ESG and corporate governance as well. And I'm sure we'll speak about some of these issues in today's discussion.
Great, thanks, Anjali. And finally, Dr. Agarwal.
Good afternoon, everyone. Delighted to be here. I'm O.P. Agarwal. I currently head an organization called the World Resources Institute India. The World Resources Institute itself is a global think tank and a research organization. Again, like Terry, primarily working in the areas of environment, sustainability, and climate change. Thank you.
Wonderful, thank you. As you can see, we have a really diverse panel with rich experiences. So let me jump right in. So ESG reflects a shift towards broader stakeholder capitalism, a shift from shareholders as being the primary stakeholders for a corporation to customers and employees and the community and the planet. So how does the focus on ESG help companies strategically? Why ESG? Anjali, if I may request you to start us off. And as someone that's investing in this space, would love to hear your perspective.
Thank you, Kami. Let me take two perspectives to this. One is that of current large companies. I think in general across the world, the 3 C's have spoken. The 3 big stakeholders for any enterprise: your consumers, your community, and your capital. Large global capital pools are already shifting towards more responsible businesses, even in hard to abate industries, whether it is cement or steel or mining and so on, which absolutely the world needs these commodities. There is a requirement that the companies demonstrate they will be more responsible towards E, S, and G, so environment, society, and governance. In addition, we are finding that consumers, the other C, the second C, or maybe the first C, if you will, are also requiring, they would prefer that consumer preferences are shifting. If given an affordable alternative, they would pick a better, more responsible product. And finally, and most importantly, the communities in which companies operate, their employees, their suppliers, all of them want to work with better companies that are more responsible. So really the 3 C's have spoken. ESG is no longer a nice to have, it is a must have. If you are not responsible, cost of capital goes up dramatically, risk increases dramatically. And consequently, ESG is no longer just a narrow sliver which the board looks at, or it is tucked away into CSR. It is front and center, it is very important, it is a board and management matter. The second point I want to make is increasingly solutions for ESG, for environment particularly and sustainability, will come from technology. What Delhivery has demonstrated over the last many years is using digitization and technology in a highly innovative way to take an old economy business, which was somewhat wasteful, and really create massive efficiencies and responsibility out of it. So similarly, what digitization was for the last 20 years, and I've said this before, sustainability will be for the next 20. We will have to see integrated business models. So it is not sustainability or ESG as a narrow vertical, but really embedded across the organization. It's important for survival. It's important for competitive advantage.
Very interesting. You referred to large corporations in industries like cement and steel, and would love to hear, Mr. Acharya, your perspective from JSW's point of view. How do you think about ESG and why is it important to you?
Thank you, Kami, for that question. I think let me reiterate the sentiments that sustainability is a business requirement now and it's no longer optional. We use 2 terms also. We use sustainability and we are using ESG in this conference. So I just want to make one thing clear as per my understanding. Sustainability deals with internal business practices and processes that we need to adopt as a business to build sustainable business practices. That is how we ensure that our business continue and flourish. Whereas ESG are basically the risk management tool to manage risk related to environment, social, and governance issues. I just wanted to clarify my understanding, these 2 terms, and now we will be using this in a synonym. So ethical and socially responsible companies need to be able to demonstrate to all their stakeholders how they perform and where they're heading regarding many aspects of environment, social, and economic governance that we talk about. But let me provide a perspective from manufacturing industry, because JSW, we are primarily into manufacturing, and that to steel, cement, as you stated. look at from Indian perspective, manufacturing has emerged as one of the very high growth sector in India. And we have a potential to become a global manufacturing hub by 2030. And I estimate tell that we can add more than 500 US billion annually to the global economy. And when we come to steel industry, where JSW primarily is, and we are possibly going to double the capacity in another 10 years, and around 156 US billion investment is required by 2030-31. And as my information goes, already 40 billion US dollar has been committed from the foreign investment. Now, to realize these investment, the industry needs to act with an increased focus on ESG, because the important out of 3C Anjali talked about, the investors are increasingly inclined to make a decisions after they look at whether the ESG performance of a given company is good enough and is the risk they're managing well, because that can make an investor to shy away. So it is, and let me also tell, it is not just investor, but employees. You know, if you want to hire fresh, talent, I mean, they're increasingly looking at companies' environmental performance, social performance, and governance performance. Customers, suppliers, and numerous other stakeholders are looking at companies to design and implement long-term sustainable policies that not only support growth, but addresses these environmental social impacts and the companies have. And they play a crucial role in one of the very prominent issues now we are facing with the climate change and decarbonization pathway. So there is a huge reputational risk as investors and customers are increasingly making decisions based on companies' sustainable profiles. And it is one of the very important issue right now as part of the business strategy for the companies.
Thank you. So ESG is about risk management and competitiveness, as you see it, both of which are very critical for growth. Excellent. Sandeep, as Anjali mentioned, Delivery has, through technology and digitization over the last several years, really made supply chains more efficient. You have provided access to efficient supply chains to a larger variety of customers. And so how do you think about ESG, and what does it mean for you?
So I think the other two panelists have covered sort of very important elements of why ESG. I think we beg to ask the question as to whether it's taken too long for such a concept to actually emerge. Because we've extracted, as consumers, businesses, societies, we've extracted so much out of the world that our current accounts are in deficit, and it's time to pay back. And that's, we're a young company. We're only a 10-year-old company, and I think it's important for companies to actually build it into the fabric of how they design the organization, how they design the company from early start, right? And I think you have to look at ES and G separately. I think G is a given. If you're going to employ one person, even if you don't take money from someone else to build a business, but if you're going to employ one other person, you've got to start thinking about governance. And I think that's where the world is heading. And then comes S, and then comes E, and then different businesses will have different limits of what they can do with E, because in some cases it might be very superficial. They can just switch off the lights. But in industries like ours, it is extremely, extremely core. The supply chain industry where delivery works is a $200 billion business in India today, and will be $300 billion over the next 5-6 years. Now, a big component of that is fuel, because you're always moving things around. Our job is to move things around. Whatever somebody else manufactures on this panel, we move it around. That's what we do. So there's fuel, there's packaging, there's a whole bunch of stuff around real estate that we use. So the E part of the ESG is actually very, very core to our business. And we have to start thinking about what this means for the society, what it means for us as a business. And it only works if it actually somehow affects the bottom line. Yes, there's pressures from investors, and the capital side of it is very important. but I think it really sticks if it starts actually affecting your bottom line. And I'll give you an example of what we've done, right? Our technology allows us to massively scale up the size of trucks that we use. Now, most of the market uses a certain size of truck, which is a standard 32 feet truck. Now that truck, I have some numbers over here. Let me pull them up. Now that 32 feet truck has a load capacity of 16 tons. It typically costs about 0.125 liters per kilo to move an item. But our technology allows us to scale that up to 46 liters. And it's not easy to do. Actually, it's the technology that enables it. It's not the scale and load of it. When you go up that, when you move it up to that scale, that cost goes down to 0.001 liter per kilo, which means that on a monthly basis, with our current size, we can save 440,000 liters of fuel every month. I hope you can hear me. I think I just gave me, so just imagine the scale of that. And if you achieve even half of that, that's a massive impact on the environment. Now, that only works because it actually really affects the bottom line of the business. So as we think about ESG, and everything that the other panelists said is absolutely true. But for us, we take it one step further, which is how does it affect cost per shipment? Or how does it affect customer satisfaction? Everything measures down to that. And if you do that, then it becomes active rather than passive.
So you're really drilling it down into business metrics and tracking against those, which is interesting. Thanks, Sandeep. We've heard an investor perspective and business perspective, but as research and thought leaders in this space, would love to hear Dr. Dhawan and Dr. Agarwal, your perspectives on why you think ESG is important for organizations, corporate or otherwise.
Thank you. Very interesting discussion. And one thing which I would like to bring forward is that today even customer is becoming very sensitive towards from which company they are buying the product. How are they responsible? Is this a responsible company? And it is that even from the government side, when you are talking of getting government approvals, they also look at that whether that company is environment sensitive, are they better governed, and all those issues are coming in today's era of competition. So therefore, for the company's survival itself, it becomes extremely important to take care of the ESG. The other point is that ultimately, and I always say that this is a misconception that environmentally responsible or to looking at sustainability, governance, and so on is going to be expensive. That's not the case, because ultimately, perhaps it's going to be more profitable. Because if you're becoming sensitive towards taking care of the natural resources or recycling as much as possible, you're actually going to save money in the long run. And the environment where you are prevailing, because ultimately you are not going to do business for a year or two, you are perhaps going to be there forever. And therefore, it is important that the micro environment that is created over there is taken care of in the best possible way. And then again, as I said, that there is correlation between the resource efficiency and the financial profitability. Because see what we are doing, like I'll just take example of water, because every corporate has to use water in some form or the other. So if you're recycling that water, which is created as a waste, with some technology, you're treating it and bringing it back, maybe today you'll say that I'm spending money, but ultimately the water table won't go down and you will be able to do it. And lastly, what I would like to say, and that is more from a consumer perspective, that as a consumer also, if you want to invest in a company, you look into all these things, their ESG, and whether they are investing in new technologies, because technologies of yesterday are not going to work tomorrow. So if the company is still working in the traditional way, maybe coal is cheaper today, but tomorrow surely the renewable energy options are going to be much cheaper. And therefore, as an investor also, one will look into, is the company investing in the best technologies that are available today? So therefore, it's win-win for your own business that you follow this. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Agarwal?
Well, just to add on to what Vibha just mentioned, for me, the question is really, why did it take so long for us to realize that ESG is important for all the companies? Why are we raising this question now? Why did it not come up earlier? I think it's taken far too long for this to come up. It's an interconnected world and everything depends on everything else. And if corporates or companies were to serve the interests of only their shareholders, I think that's going to be a short-term perspective. Vibha very rightly spoke about coal. Coal may be cheap today, but tomorrow it won't exist. So if you want to look at long-term business, you have to ensure sustainability as a way of your continuing on a longer-term basis. So I really think that it's taken far too long to come, but it's glad it's come now. And in a planet like this, COVID gave us one example. Whoever you may be, you could get affected. And at the end of it, no one is safe unless everyone is safe. So one way of getting everyone to safe is you come together. Whatever you may do, at the end of it, everyone is responsible towards sustainability. Corporates and companies or manufacturing, whatever it is, they are not different from this rest of the community. Thanks.
Great, thank you. So I think what's coming out loud and clear is that ESG is not something that's optional or about doing good. It's really about helping the bottom line, and it's important for competitiveness and success and growth. And I think that's really the key message here. How are we seeing regulations and policy drive change in ESG in India? And how are companies really internalizing ESG in terms of setting goals, in terms of measuring them, setting processes, and building commitment across the organization towards ESG, which is, I can imagine, quite difficult. What are some of the challenges in doing this? And Mr. Acharya, if I may draw on you for this, that would be great, and then we'll move on to the other panelists.
Thank you, Kavi. I think there is three parts to your questions. Let me address one by one. The first is that how the regulations is driving ESG in India. Now, look, it started with the Companies Act 2013 when it did introduce the first ESG disclosure requirement for the companies. And in addition to this, companies are mandated to include disclosure on opportunities, threats, risk, and concern as part of their annual reporting under the regulations of SEBI, and that is known as BRR, or Business Responsible Reporting, which was latter now amended and called as Business Responsibility and Sustainability Reporting Framework, and that is going to be mandated for the top companies from next financial year, and this year it will be voluntary. And this is in line with the National Guidelines for Responsible Business Conduct, or NGRBC. Now, you look at India is gradually moving towards other voluntary frameworks. If you see the larger companies like us, we are looking at TCFD that looks at how you include the climate change related risk and opportunity into your financial disclosure and identify those risk and opportunity in terms of your opportunity that can give you revenue and risk that can take away. Rating agencies such as CDP, DJSI, they are mandating the big companies or many companies to focus more on ESG and its disclosure. So these factors are driving the ESG in India right now for the companies. And to address your second part of the question, how companies are internalizing, let me give example of how we are doing so that I can share the information. To start with, as I told, I completely agree with Sandeep's comment that when business will start this journey, it has to look at what are the opportunities first. Because even we also look at sustainability as a business opportunity rather than a business risk, because opportunity is something which quite attract people fast to internalize these strategies. And to start with what we did first, we declared a vision statement, that is where we want to achieve and what exactly sustainability means for us. Because it is very important. This is like I always tell, this is like a story what we heard about elephant, five blind men want to see elephant, and you touch on different part, you look differently. So therefore, we have to put that perspective. So that is what we have put a vision statement. And to achieve the vision statement, we developed a framework, and that is aligned with all international standards. We have identified 16 core focus areas. We have issued policies across. So once this policy is given, then the next is that how do we set targets and objectives that can be driven from top management till the working levels. And that is what very important to include those as a KRA for a different level of management so that it is get implemented. And then we have set up a governance mechanism where the board reviews the performance, and then executive committee reviews, and the operational level reviews every on the daily basis. And that is how it internalizes. But most importantly, when you do that, there are a lot of resistance you find, specifically when an organization who are accustomed to a traditional way of doing things. And that is where I completely agree again with Sandeep's comment that you need to show what is the benefit you get. To give an example, if we save 1 kg of coke in steel making, I can save 50 crores a year, and that's a significant amount. If I tell that fact to my operation manager, they take a note of it. Oh, this is something we must do, because things move when it is related to money, and that is I've seen throughout my life. So when sustainability is linked to linked to money, it becomes the acceptability becomes greater and faster. So you can drive and internalize that quickly. I'll give another example how it is helping even the big corporate like us to raise capital, and that is giving less cost of the capital raising. We raise 3 tranches of sustainability linked bond. In fact, JSW Steel was the first steel company in the world to raise a sustainability linked bond. What does it mean? You commit a assured performance level, and your investor invests. And when we did that, it got so much of oversubscribed. We had initially given a guidance value of 4.5%. Because it was oversubscribed, because everybody, the investor loved the concept of giving a KPI linked to your finances, we could close at 4.125%. It's a great reduction in my cost of borrowing. Same thing we did with our JSW Energy when we issued green bond. Same thing we did our infrastructure business. What I'm telling you is not only helping in cutting down your cost, increasing your efficiency, it is also helping in getting those finances at a cheaper rate. So in a sense, in short, I would like to say that driving sustainability or ESG is actually giving business benefit in all facts, and it is catching up in India. So it is no more a fad right now. Indian companies are seriously adopting it, because ultimately business is there to make a bottom line. Because if you don't have a healthy bottom line, you cannot support your business, nor social commitments, nor your business commitments. So therefore, ESG practices are helping in companies' healthy bottom lines, and Indian corporates are increasingly adopting and accepting it.
Thank you. So you set a clear vision, and then you built ESG into business outcomes across the organization. And I think that's an interesting perspective of how you build it into your business framework as opposed to something that sits outside. Dr. Dalwin, I know you work with several organizations in terms of partnerships. What are you seeing? How are organizations doing this?
Well, really speaking, it varies from partner to partner, but by and large, I'll say that the scenario is changing completely. Just to start with, because many of you might be knowing that TERI, the Energy and Resources Institute, earlier we were Tata Energy Research Institute. And I'd like to acknowledge Tata's as one of the trendsetters in terms of sustainability, because right from day one, or why TERI was established was with the objective of looking into the kind of problems mankind is going to face in the future. And way back in 1974, we started talking about role of renewable energy and environment as a whole. We also brought out another report, which was Green India 2047, where we talked about business as usual, what it's going to need. But very rightly, as mentioned, that people never took it, many of us never took it seriously. And in a way, it was that climate change may occur and may impact your business. But last couple of years, due to pandemic and otherwise, we have realized that we have only one planet to live, and it is not save the planet, it is save the human race. And therefore, we have to take care of sustainability as a whole. Now, it goes without saying that people do realize, and also in this era of internet and everyone getting connected digitally to the other person, everyone knows which company is acting in a responsible way and which company is not so responsible. And if we look at the 5 global risks depicted by World Economic Forum, the top 5 risks have shifted from economic focus to environmental and societal stress. So therefore, the companies, the corporates, they understand very well that if they have to survive, both in terms of competition, they have to move towards cleaner technologies, as well as survival as a good corporate that they are able to sell their produce. They have no other way. The other thing I would like to say that unfortunately, our generation was the worst generation because we got everything served. We never had, because earlier sustainability was in our blood because of affordability issues. But then for us, everything was in plenty and we overexploited it. But the next generation is far more responsible. So if you give them something which is little expensive, but following the regulations, following ESG, the company which follows that, the next generation would like to buy from that particular company. So at the back of their mind, it is always, yes, this is a responsible company. And therefore, even if their product is little expensive, we'll go towards that. So therefore, the move today for the corporates is also from shareholder to stakeholders. So, and that is the mantra for the survival of the companies. Thank you.
Thank you. Let me quickly go over to Anjali and then Sandeep. Anjali, the startups that you're investing in, what are you observing there? And then Sandeep, any thoughts from your perspective would be great.
We invest in probably 4 areas. We look at food and consumption, so food and the agri supply chain, mobility and supply chains and digitization, financing and digital tools, as well as energy transition and resource management. What we are finding is, we pick these areas because these have the larger climate footprint, if you will, both in terms of emission as well as the ability to use and conserve resources both ways. So if we apply sort of the COP framework to this and say adaptation, mitigation, resilience, in countries like ours, where it's not the people-planet trade-off is not there's no trade-off. We actually have to achieve the planet, people, profit balance. We still will continue to increase our energy consumption as economic growth and productivity continues to grow till at least 2040, if not 2050. Sandeep mentioned cost of fuel. So in fact, today a new unit of solar costs less than a new unit of thermal. But 70% of our energy comes from thermal. So back to your question, Kami, we look at areas that are using technology and innovation to drive solutioning in all of these areas. So we're seeing a massive digitization of supply chains across the board. Delivery is an example they're doing it in logistics, but we are seeing the same thing happening in manufacturing, industry 4.0, in agri. The pace of technology and digital adoption is absolutely mind-blowing. And one thing that the COVID pandemic has done, a positive one, is accelerate this adoption of digitization. So consequently, you're able to track and trace products to their origin. It satisfies consumers and customers, both consumer, retail consumer, as well as enterprise customers who want that traceability, trackability. You're able to deploy sensors at scale because sensor costs have crashed. So you can actually put sensors into smallholder farms in India, which earlier was not possible. IoT is now embedded, big data is being used, ML and AI has become endemic to all large enterprise. And I'm sure you see this at FedEx. We should ask you your perspective also. In business planning, the use of data and analytics and AI in business planning, right? So increase in efficiency, reduction in wastage, better circularity across the board. That's the kind of stuff that we are seeing in startups, and we are seeing enterprises actually start to adopt them as well.
Absolutely. I think digital is a huge enabler for efficient supply chains, which then support sustainable supply chains. So completely agree with you. Sandeep, any thoughts?
So I'll make 2 points. I'll make them very quickly because I think a lot has already been said on the topic. But firstly, I step back and think about ESG as a concept. And I ask myself, why are these 3 letters together? There's no reason why ESG should be put together. It is like bricks. It's kind of just stuck together. Because they are, S&G still have some relationship, but they are 3 very, very different topics. And each needs its own weightage and it requires focus. And I think, so that's one thing. So you don't have to actually club them together and think of ESG as a policy and ESG has to implement it. It is happening. I think it's happening in 3 different ways. There's voluntary, which I think several of the panel members have said, and same thing is true for us. We will be sort of, it's important for companies like us to have a board level ESG view on it. Anjali used to be on our board, and she's driven a lot of this over the last 4 or 5 years. So one is voluntary. The second one is it is being enforced, but it's being enforced by investors. It's being enforced by consumers, as has been said. So we have some of our global investors. One of our requirements, and it's not an E point, but it's a G point, is to actually increase women participation at the board level. And so we are committed to that as a company.
Sure.
We don't, the Indian standard says we need 1 woman participant, but that's not necessarily what delivery aspires to. Half the consumers in the country are women, right? So why should the board only have 1 woman? So we are going to take a different approach to that and see how we can change that. It takes us time, but we'll get there. And the third one is there are policy changes that are being brought in by the government, which are very subtle. They might bring out the ESG stuff, and I think Mr. Acharya mentioned how new things are coming online next year. But even now, when you move from Bharat 4 to Bharat 6, it's having an impact on the E part of ESG. So those things are very much there. When the government starting to get more, the CSR, the 0.5% of profits that public companies plow back in, that is sort of the social commitment that the companies have. So there are some policies, they are there. If you look at them together from an ESG lens, you'll find that there's stuff already happening. But a lot more can happen. But I think voluntarism is very, very important to actually bring it all together.
Absolutely. And we'll pick up on the S and the G in a minute. But before we do that, I wanted to go over to Dr. Agarwal and ask you if you had any thoughts on this topic, but also maybe if you could talk a little bit about how are we seeing the ecosystem come together towards achieving ESG goals, whether it's startups or larger corporations or research and not-for-profit organizations or even the government. What kind of partnerships are we seeing come together, and how are these pushing the agenda along?
I think in many ways, many new partnerships are building up. I mean, traditionally, I've spent a long time working in the government. Traditionally, governments used to work as a silo. You have government and you have others. Today, you find governments working so much more with research organizations, with corporates. If you go into the Niti Aayog, you find so many different people involved in the Niti Aayog, helping them with formulating their policies. So it's sort of, informing their policies, doing the analysis for them. It's a huge partnership that is building up. And I think an organization like the Niti Aayog is really taking a lead on that. Many other ministries of the government are also tapping organizations like us, organizations like TERI, in advising them what's the right way to go about it. We've been working with a number of corporates. When this whole climate change issue started taking shape and started getting more prominent, a lot of companies wanted to align their emissions and bring down their emissions. The problem was, how do we do it? Internally, they didn't have that kind of capability. We had actually, one of the examples that we have is we set up something called the Greenhouse Gas Protocol. It was actually a group of like-minded organizations that came together offering support to corporates who wanted to access our data, our information, our skills in creating their own climate plans. Today, we are working with a number of micro, small, and medium enterprises, MSMEs, in helping them becoming more energy efficient. Looking at, carrying out energy audits and finding out which machines they need to replace, what kind of efficiency gains they would get through that. The whole game on electric mobility, for example, is cutting across so many ministries. But then in the states, in the cities, where do you set up charging stations? What are your travel plans like? So a lot of this technical support is coming from organizations outside the corporates, outside the governments. I think this is a big kind of a partnership that is building up. So technical support for all that. Now, the way we work is we work in a couple of places. We don't have the bandwidth to work across the country, but we work in a few places. But then add on to that by creating guidebooks, developing training programs, and working with partners in helping to scale up. So I think this is a big partnership that is coming up. And as I said, we work both with governments and with the corporate sector in sort of helping implement ESG strategies.
Great, thank you. And some of these partnerships, Mr. Acharya, would be interested to get your thoughts on what are some of the areas that these collaborations are spanning. There's all the way from sustainability financing to energy efficient operations to building ESG into products and pricing and branding and so on. So what is your sense of where a lot of the attention is currently?
I think from an industry perspective, like for example, we do a lot of collaborative work with both TERI and WRI, where Dr. Viva and OP is there. But most of the collaborations focus right now is on the technological collaborations, because again, I'm talking from a manufacturing perspective. And the climate change issue becoming the focus of each and every organization right now, from a both opportunity and risk perspective, it is very important that we bring in right kind of technology which are futuristic in nature, that can enable in decarbonizing the sector. We are working in the hard to abate sectors, that is steel and cement. It is hard to abate because it is very difficult to decarbonize, because the process itself emits carbon dioxide. And therefore, that has to be a drastically different technology to be brought in, whether it is a green hydrogen you bring in or carbon capture storage technology you bring in, because these has to be cost efficient, and that is where the collaborations matter. And it has not only in the national level, it has to happen in the global level with the technology suppliers, research organizations, thought leadership, industry, all should come together and do the collaboration. And that is where we are also focusing. The other part I just want to touch upon on the product side and the branding side, because that is also important. That unfortunately right now in India, possibly you will not expect to get a premium for a sustainable product or a green product, because we are a price sensitive society. But at the same time, I could see there is an increasing value or attentions to differentiate. If you have a sustainability angle, or you are a green angle, or a product, a better product angle in the sustainability perspective, you get a differentiation. That means you get a demand, and that's what you see. Like, let us take a case of cement. JSW produce all their cement, most of their cement from the West, which is coming from the steel industry. So therefore, it is one of the greenest cement. Although we compete in the market with the price, but we get a positioning and branding, and that is where you, as an organization, we get the benefit. Let me give another example of commonly used. Everybody builds home and they require cement, and they also require steel. Those rebars or TMT bars, and that is where we work closely with all the industries, with CII, to build a standard and get it eco-labeled or Green Pro certification. That means this product meets a certain threshold standards to become qualified as a green product. But the benefit, if the consumer, what they get a benefit, if you use this product, you consume 15 to 25% less quantity of steel. That's a financial benefit again. So it is not only green, it is also give an economic value to the smaller consumer who builds their houses. So therefore, and that is where it requires a collaboration. It's only industry cannot achieve that because it requires standard setters, regulators, the consumers, entire supply chain to come together. Even the designers all come together, and that is where the collaboration is working to drive the ESG agenda. I just gave 2 examples, and there are multiple examples like we are pushing in the circularity of the economy and use somebody's waste becoming somebody's product. The other example is the sand, replacement of sand, where we are taking all the waste, making it the sand and selling it market, and that replaces the natural sand requirement, which is environmentally not really good. And that is again, you require collaboration with the standard setter, with the BIS, with the regulators, and then we work together for a solution which is sustainable.
That's excellent. Dr. Dhawan, any examples stand out in your mind as for these partnerships that we've been talking about?
Yeah, the partnerships, I'll just like to touch upon 2 points. And one is that what is voluntary today may become mandatory tomorrow with the Prime Minister's announcement and otherwise looking at the environment. The other partnerships, when I say it is of 2 kinds, one is that there has to be a holistic kind of review. Like, I'll just give you an example. There is one company by the name Jain Irrigations. They got into tissue culture propagated plants, or earlier they were only into irrigation, micro irrigation. Now they gave the complete package to the farmer, which is right from the superior quality planting material to selling the produce. So therefore, it becomes win-win. So one is saving the natural resource. And there are many more, like what is now coming. Like, let's look into the entire value chain of production of urea. So there is government subsidy. In the production of urea, there is so much of GHG emissions. So if one goes for a nano urea, there is going to be saving at every step. Now, what we require is a sort of partnership between different players till the level of the farmer, because he is the ultimate user. So there are successful examples in the space. One thing which is lacking, and what I would like to emphasize, is that let's not depend too much on the technology coming from the West. We should definitely depend on that technology to some bit, but let's look, India's requirements are very different, and therefore we should be partners in developing the technology because of our different needs, price sensitivity, as well as the scale on which we operate. So we have to invest in technology development, then capacities to absorb the technology, because there are going to be teething problems for which you need trained manpower. And then, of course, the awareness about the technologies, what kind of benefits it's going to bring to the company, but more so to the environment, because we totally ignored the environmental health impacts on our population. And as a country, we have to pay a very huge price for that.
Absolutely. Thank you. I wanted to come back to the S and the G. So social responsibility in a country like India obviously covers a variety of issues and problems. How can companies think about how they focus their efforts to create value? For example, diversity and inclusion practices and skilling initiatives could be one way to expand access to talent, build employability, and so forth. But would love to get perspectives on this. Anjali, would be great to have you weigh in.
Thank you, Cami. I just want to pick up on one thing Agarwal mentioned earlier, that a lot of the cross-sectoral, cross-ministerial thought work that is currently happening at the government is actually very, very important, very powerful. And particularly Niti Aayog as the hub for bringing together across ministries' agendas. And a lot of these new solutions, right? There are new technologies, new areas will require new solutions that may not fit neatly into any one sector. So you actually have to build collaboration across the board. Coming back to your question on society. See, society also links back, and allow me to say this, that on the eve of Women's Day, I think the whole gender and inclusion dialogue is actually low-hanging fruit. it's 50%, and Sandeep said this, 50% of the population is female. So why do we even still have to talk about this, right? It should actually be a given. There should be 50% women everywhere. So going beyond that, inclusion is important. A culture of inclusion is important, but linking it back to climate change and building resilience, whether it is process resilience, business resilience, or income resilience, in people and communities who are going to get, their incomes actually going to get quite massively displaced and disrupted as climate action starts coming into being. India is a hot country, it will get hotter. Agriculture will get disrupted. If we don't organize it, we will have outcomes. Large industry will continue to get automated. What happens to jobs? So skilling in a different way, skilling in new economy skills is going to play a very important role. So I want to kind of link it back. It is not enough to say we are going to have diversity. We actually have to think about our societies and communities in which we operate as large companies and small companies in a very holistic way and build resilience. Second is, and I think the government's doing a lot of good work in this, that the creation of large-scale public digital rails. So those of us who are sort of, many people spoke about skilling. We know that now there is a whole end-to-end arc that is getting created through the DESH program. So bringing together eShram and Unnati and NCS, and really completing that arc from registry, skilling to jobs. So there are a number of things that large companies are doing, small companies are starting to do, and some of them are doing more than their fair share, like a Delivery. It's really at the forefront. I'm very proud of what Delivery does actually on the, not just on the ESG for the sake of ESG, but truly absorbing it and integrating it into the business model.
Yeah, thank you. And point well taken that we shouldn't have to talk about gender diversity. And well, at least on this panel, we have 50% representation. That's a good thing. Sandeep, any additional thoughts before we move on to closing remarks?
So I think S is very, very strategic because I think both E and S are both very, very strategic to a company's success. E has direct implications on cost, and S has direct implication on where you get your talent from. And so we for us, it's not an activity that we do because we are trying to do something for society. We're doing this because it's so critical for us. And we as a company have not yet reached the limit where we need to spend 0.5% of our profits on CSR. So what we do is voluntary. But is it really voluntary? We employ directly, indirectly through contract labor as well as people who are actually on our own payrolls. We have 80,000 people in the company, 80,000 plus. This is a 10-year-old company that employs 80,000 people across the country. Those 80,000 people are across 18,000 pin codes. And I know Mr. Acharya will understand what I'm coming from because they're a large industry that employ hundreds of thousands of people. Now, when you go out and get that many people, the larger the workforce I can tap, the better for me. And so for me, women are no longer an option. Retired army personnel are no longer an option. Retired folks are no longer an option. They are all part of the gambit that I want to go out and get. As a company, we are not big fans of the gig worker. We have gig workers, but we are not big fans of the gig worker because we believe that is discriminatory. To get somebody to work for 4 or 5 hours a day and not pay them their PF and ESI is not the company that Delivery wants to be and will ever be. So, for us, making sure benefits, skilling, all of that stuff is happening from day one. A lot of the people we employ, this is their first job. How do you actually skill them so that they can go on to do other stuff? They can do this for 2 years, 3 years. They'll get tired. They can't go around delivering for the rest of their life. So either they find ways of actually getting other jobs in the company or they move on to other roles. But during that 2-3 years, we've skilled them. How have we impacted their families? So, that becomes extremely, extremely critical for us. So, I'm not proud to say this, but today, in our operations workforce, only 2.5% of women. It's hardcore physical activity, but there's also issues around security that come into play, right? But it's very clear that over the next 2 years, that number is going to get to 10%. That's a stated objective, and that's being monitored at the board level, right? How do we do that? We can do something similar to airlines, right? We can have a distribution center that's completely manned by women. They don't have to go out and deliver parcels, but they can man a distribution center and things like that. We're also trying to, our network is very, very dense. What that does is the average time travel is less. So more women can actually participate. So we're trying to do stuff around that. And same thing for society. I think we do stuff for society because we leverage our capability to help society. We don't try out and go and do things we are not good at. So when, sort of wave 2 of COVID happened, how could we contribute when we have, we worked with FedEx actually, you guys and we were collaborating, right? To actually bring those concentrators from China, give it to people, or during floods, we are able to use drones to actually still get to people. So we do all of that stuff, but we do that because people want to do that in the company, and that motivates people within the company. I think people were, the pride that people felt that we had a role to play then was immense, and that sort of keeps people going. So I think it's not, again, for me, it's not an if or government doesn't have to mandate it. Nobody's mandated on us. It is just critical to how we operate as a business.
Yeah, I think well said. I think it's part of our existence. We are all live, dynamic organizations of people, and I think we can't, remove these objectives from who we are and how we operate. So well said. Great. I'd love to, before we conclude, I'd love to go around the room and get any closing thoughts or ideas or examples that you might want to share. Maybe if we can start, Anjali, with you, and we'll go around the screen.
Sure. Let me start with sort of two companies that we partner with extensively. One is a company called Pran.ai that is using a patent pending technology for air purification. And Dr. Dhawan talked about creating indigenous technology, and this is what it is. Using ionization to extract particulate matter from air, taking that particulate matter and turning it into tiles, into flooring tiles, completing that loop of circularity. And this is an Indian company using Indian technology, deploying in factories, commercial establishments, hospitals, and schools. Another one that I will talk about, and that specifically works at resilience, is a company called Eggos. Eggos is building the Amul of eggs. Right? So they're working with smallholder poultry farmers, giving them input, giving them the feed, helping them improve their productivity, and getting them to market. Meanwhile, both of these companies are very successful commercially. They're not doing this as a social project. This is integrated and integral to their business model. This is their strategy. And that is why it is actually sustainable, scalable, because ultimately it's very successful.
Thanks, Anjali, for sharing that. Dr. Agarwal?
I'll give one example again, of work that we did with a public bus company. Now, all these public bus companies in India are losing money. But we found that a very simple exercise of improved maintenance or systematic maintenance and driver training can save up to 10% of fuel consumption. Now, fuel consumption is about 35% of the total cost of operating a bus service. And saving 10% is about 3.5% of your total cost. Now, that coming down, a lot of these companies actually move from red to get onto the black. Now, the reason why are they not doing it? Because they're so caught up with ensuring that you have a certain number of buses on the road every day, that the thought of saving fuel through systematic maintenance and driver training never really came to them. All we had to do is develop a protocol of measuring how much fuel a certain vehicle with a certain driver has consumed on a certain route, take the worst 10% and train them, look at those buses, simple tinkering for improving maintenance. That led to a 10% improvement in fuel efficiency. So these are the kinds of things that, partnerships can help build up. People who are doing the same thing day in and day out don't think new. New ideas can come in often from people outside like this. Let me leave it with that. Thanks, Kavi.
Absolutely. Thank you. Dr. Dhawan?
Yeah, I'm just another thing which comes to my mind is that we are talking of large corporates. Yes, they are very, very responsible. But somewhere perhaps we are missing on micro, small, and medium. Because really speaking, they are integral part, because even large corporates, some component or the other, they'll have to buy from these smaller players. So when we are talking of sustainability, perhaps that needs to be engraved, or the message has to go to these small companies as well. And I'll just like to say another point, and that is when everyone gets together, it's bound, the success is bound to happen. And let's take example of LED, because there it was that it has to reach everyone and we succeeded. So here also it is something that if there is a will, there is a way, but let's have every player, every stakeholder into this particular movement. Thank you.
Absolutely, the multiplier effect.
Absolutely.
Sandeep?
So my comments are actually I don't know what the audience of this event is, but I'm hoping that there are younger companies here, and so I address this to the younger companies who are our peer set. You don't have to be a 50-year-old company, and like Dr. Dhawan said, it doesn't have to be a large corporation. And I go beyond just SME. I'm going to the young company that's starting up. Started up 2-3 years ago, is starting up now. Build this into the fabric of your business today, and look at all those three aspects of ESG. Don't get, they might be limited. You can do with one or the other, but actually start doing something or the other with all three of them. And if you're starting a business, you employ 2 people, you take small seed capital from Anjali, you have a responsibility towards governance and build from that. And so then build on S and then build on E. So I would encourage the younger companies to think about this deeply.
Excellent. Thanks, Sandeep. And Mr. Acharya, you get to have the last word.
Okay, let me expand the discussion on ACE. To be ACE has 2 parts, ACE of ESG. When we talk about one part, what you do inside the factory, that's about your diversity, your health and safety, labor practices, training, competency. So all this you do in ACE part, where inside the boundary. And when we talk about ACE, people think of only community, but that is what you do outside the community. But again, I am not talking about philanthropy. What you do outside the boundary of your organization has a greater impact on business, because no successful business can be built when you are working in a society which is not successful. And I mean, if I draw off the example what Anjali started on the water, I have seen companies stopping their operations because water is not available and it has to be given to the society. So therefore, when a company works on an issue, they has to also see that how these issues impact to their business if it is not managed in the society well. The other example I can see about how you improve the livelihood of the people outside. Like, we have dedicated women BPOs where we train them and have BPOs to make them their livelihood well. So they're well supported. So I strongly believe that a successful business can thrive only in a successful society.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you for sharing your insights and perspectives. This has been a great conversation. I think we covered a lot of ground, starting with why ESG to how companies can internalize ESG and tie it to business outcomes, to how the ecosystem can work together. And then we also touched upon social and governance, which are very important facets. It is evident that ESG is going to play a pivotal role in transforming the future, and companies have an opportunity to adopt goals and strategies, as well as put in place processes and technologies and forge partnerships to create value and achieve the triple bottom line of profits, people, and the planet. Thanks again for joining us. And Isha, back to you.
Thank you so very much, Ms. Vishwanathan, for weaving it all together so very well. And thank you once again for joining us, our panelists, Ms. Bansal, Mr. Agarwal, Dr. Dhawan. It's been a pleasure listening to you. Of course, a big thank you to Mr. Barasia, Mr. Acharya. It's been a learning experience listening to each one of you share your knowledge with us and the future roadmap, because there really is a need for change to ensure a sustainable future. And each of you are doing your bit along with your organizations to drive that change. So on behalf of our entire team, I'd like to thank you for joining us. And I'd like to remind all our viewers that we look forward to knowing what your feedback is. I'd like to request all of you to please fill up the feedback forms. On behalf of ET Edge, I'd like to thank each one of you for joining us for FedEx Express Presents the Economic Times ESG Leadership Dialogue on ESG, paving the way for the future business in India. We've all had some great takeaways today. Thank you once again for joining us. This is Isha Bhalla signing off.